Think of the amount of South Africans who are living with bipolar who don't know where to get help, where to get treatment, or that there is support out there. We run a call center that has a dedicated bipolar helpline, and we receive so many calls on a daily basis from loved ones, colleagues, patients living with bipolar that didn't know that there is help. So it's really, really important that we highlight this. It is a real medical illness that needs real treatment. So, for example, if you have diabetes or hypertension or cancer, you get real treatment. The same thing with bipolar disorder. You need real treatment.
Okay, we'll talk about how in the first place do you identify bipolar? What are the symptoms? How would I know if I have bipolar? But let me also welcome on the other line Dr. Neil Horn, a psychiatrist, joining us on the line this morning. Dr. Horn, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thank you very much. Well, maybe I should ask you this question about how will I know if I have bipolar or if I am bipolar?
Bipolar disorder requires you to have an episode of mania, and that's the difference between bipolar disorder and depression. So in bipolar disorder, a lot of people have a number of episodes of depression, but what makes it bipolar is when they go up in mood and have a manic episode. And those manic episodes can be longer, that's over a week, and severe, or they might be milder, less than a week, but more than 3 days, and not as severe. We'd call that a hypomanic episode. I can give you some more information about what mania is, if you like.
Please do,
that's the short answer
because
to your question.
as you were talking, I'm just thinking about normal stress, normal depression. I would say, well, I'm just depressed for the day. How do I know it's mania?
I'll tell you what Stephen Fry described himself as, because he's a celebrity who's openly describes himself having mania, and his description is, I'm writing and I'm doing stuff and I'm so grandiose and so full of self-belief that it's almost impossible to deal with me. I'm so hyper that I can go for 3 or 4 nights without sleeping. So that's a lovely description of what it's like to be manic.
Yep.
So full of energy, you're unstoppable. Some people call you the Duracell bunny. It's an increased mood. So people are usually euphoric, very happy, can sometimes become irritable when things are going too slowly for them, speed it up. And the description is very similar to someone who is high on drugs like cocaine. And that can often lead to a lot of confusion about whether the person is mentally ill or taking drugs or possibly even doing both.
I suppose it can get very confusing, hey? Can it not, Cassey, if you don't know how to identify somebody like that? Because you'd say, well, it's just in their personality.
Often we have callers who tell us, but I feel sad and happy all in one day. And we have what normal mood swings, where you feel happy sometimes and you feel a bit down. But with bipolar disorder is you have these extreme shifts in your mood. So when you're happy, you're ecstatic. You're on top of the world. Your thoughts are racing. You're talking really fast. Nothing can go wrong. And then you dip into a very, very deep depression, where you feel so pessimistic, you feel helpless and hopeless, even battling to get out of bed, and in some cases even suicidal. So I think once the bipolar symptom starts to affect your daily functioning, where you can't function at work, your relationships are affected, then that should be a big indicator that something is wrong. You need to get some help.
Let's talk a little bit about the available treatment, Dr. Horn.
Yeah, well, available treatment really means getting to a mental health service, and that's not so easy for everybody in South Africa. Our health services are very busy, especially our public health services. And if you've got a mental health problem, you kind of don't really feel always like going and queuing with people who've been in accidents and who've got other physical health problems. So there's a big disincentive, and when you get to the front of the health facility, somebody might look at you and think, well, this isn't so serious, so we're going to put you in the deprioritized group. So it can be quite difficult, even when you've gone to look for help, to actually get the help that you need. Bipolar disorder needs specialized treatment, so that makes it even more difficult to get treatment for most of the people in our country. So that's the downside. The upside is that if you do get there and you do get help, it can make a huge difference. And a combination of medication and psychological help can significantly reduce the number of manic and depressive episodes and the severity of those episodes.
Right. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Cassey. Let me just go to Anonymous on the line in Durban. Good morning.
Morning, Kalani. Morning to your guests. I'm a medical doctor and I have bipolar type 2. And I just wanted to highlight that in my experience, obviously in my training, but also in looking at this very holistic perspective, is that bipolar is really subdivided diagnostically into type 1 and type 2. I don't know if you've discussed the type 2 yet.
No, we haven't. I was going to ask you exactly to tell us what type 2 is.
Well, type 2 is classified by normal depressive episodes. Manic episodes as such. It's called hypomania, which will last for a minimum of 2 weeks or so, characterized by anxiety, irritability, and also increased mood to some degree. Not always that happy, go-lucky type feeling, you know. So there's such a broad spectrum of bipolar conditions. And the other thing as well that's important is that diagnostically with bipolar or any psychiatric disorder, the diagnosis becomes a diagnosis when people can't function. But in the worst case, it's affected my personal life to the degree that I can't function at work because I become so irritable. As I say, it's one of the features of hypomanic episodes.
And it would be easy for you. You're a medical doctor. You know where to go, right?
You'll be surprised. Just because I'm a medical professional, it doesn't mean that you, first of all, want to admit that there's something wrong. And also, the diagnosis isn't just made on the spot. It takes time. You need to be monitored by the psychiatrist. My diagnosis took years.
Very interesting issues. Again, Cassey, I would like to pick up on the issue of admission because people sometimes don't admit because we don't want to be judged.
Absolutely. I think the denial comes through. You know, we're thinking everything's okay, nothing is wrong. Especially what's quite interesting, we never get calls at SADAG from patients who are in a manic episode. Very, very rarely do we do because they feel great. Everything is awesome. If they're on top of the world, nothing is going wrong. We get calls from patients who are in the depressed episode when they're not coping, when they can't get out of bed, when it's then impairing their functioning. So it's very important. And the previous anonymous caller picked up on something really interesting. His colleagues were picking up, hey, something is wrong. You're not coping at work. Bipolar disorder does not only affect the individual, it affects everyone else around them, the family, relationships, people at work. So it's very important that they're also aware of what treatment is available, what support you need, because they also have to walk this journey with you and get that help.
Let me just get a comment from Dr. Horn before I go to Ruth in Cape Town and Dr. Wale as well, who have called on this issue. Dr. Horn, did anything come out for you in that call from Anonymous in Durban?
Yes, it did. I think that one of the things I wanted to pick up on is the delay in diagnosis. A lot of people will suffer with mild symptoms or symptoms that don't lead to them getting into hospital or getting specialist treatment. And the average time of delay to diagnosis is around 7 years. So that's a long time to be suffering with an illness before somebody puts their finger on it and says, hold on, this isn't just depression or this isn't just unusual behavior, this is bipolar disorder. And that's a real problem. So the onset of bipolar disorder is usually in people's 20s, and those are very precious years of people's lives, which are often not as productive as they would have been if they had been diagnosed and treated earlier. But that's even in developed countries with very good health systems.
That's very interesting. Okay, let's take Ruth in Cape Town. Ruth, good morning.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm bipolar, and it did take me about 5 or 6 years to be diagnosed because my parents were quite in denial as well. And I'm 26 now, but the previous caller made it seem like you can still function, whereas when I was in depressive periods, I was so depressed, I would just stop going to work. And I wouldn't eat, and I'd just become completely isolated, and it would just get worse and worse. And then all of a sudden, I'd start getting better. And then when I was in manic periods, I'd spend all my money in a day. It's very extreme. And also, when I was in a manic period, I'd feel great, and I'd stop taking my medication, which would obviously make everything worse.
So it means that even when you take your medication, you still are going through these phases, these episodes of manic and depressive.
With the medication, it's much better. It's not as extreme at all. You still feel sad. I mean, I was very reluctant to take the medication because I thought it would make me feel kind of like a zombie. But you still do feel happy and sad, but you can function.
It's probably not as extreme.
Yeah, you can function so much better, and you're so much nicer to be around. Like the last guy said, your colleagues notice, and your friends and boyfriend or girlfriend notice, and everyone just knows there's something wrong, but you don't want to listen to them because you don't want to be diagnosed as having a mental illness.
But the difficulty again, Ruth, is to make people around you understand what you're going through, right?
Yes, like with my parents, when I did eventually tell them, because I was too scared to tell anyone except for my boyfriend for about a year. And when I eventually told them, they acted like it was sort of a temporary crutch, and I was just feeling a little bit stressed at that time. But then when I did stop taking my medication, stupidly, during a happy phase, it just went back to the way it was, and it was just terrible. So it's obviously sort of a chronic condition.
And I'm going to ask the doctor as well to comment on this, because I was reading somewhere that it's quite difficult to diagnose younger people. At what point were you diagnosed?
When I was about 22, because I had massive depressive episodes from when I was about 17. Okay. And I was just, like the one time I went to a psychiatrist and I had to wait, and I was just feeling so, I just left. I'm not sure, it was a stupid thing to do, but you're in such a strange phase, you can't really control what you're doing, you don't act rationally.
Right, Ruth, thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. Thanks indeed. Naidu is in Durban as well. Naidu, good morning.
Thank you very much. I'm living with a person who has bipolar since 2005. And I can tell you from then till now, I've learned so much how to deal with the problem that the person has. In the beginning, I can tell you that even as a family, we refused to accept that this was anything medical. We looked at it as a spiritual problem and consulted various spiritualists in order to try and resolve the problem. It's only after a lengthy period of time that we learned how to deal with it medically. You know, in the beginning, when it's my wife that has a problem, and she had this depressive episodes as well as the manic episodes. And the manic episodes resulted in her telephoning the police and saying that we are restricting her when we knew that she was not in a proper frame of mind. But the amazing thing is, she only now in the last 2 years has realized that she needs to take medication on a regular basis. When she's down, she needs to take some sort of form of medication, and when she's up, she needs to take medication to bring it down in order to achieve some sort of equilibrium. And in us responding to her, we have learned that, you know what, on certain days she's going to be down and out, so we need to make sure she takes the medication properly. And on other days when she's showing signs of being manic, we need to resort to getting the medication and making sure she takes it, because normally when they are manic, they are reluctant to take the medication, saying that I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me.
Okay. So family support, very important here. Thank you very much, Naidu in Durban, for calling. Let me welcome here in our studios Buyisiwe Tshukulwana. Buyisiwe Tshukulwana, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very well. You are a patient?
Yes, I am. I'm a bipolar patient.
How long have you been a patient?
Oh my God, if I may count, I'm going to take over the show, but I think it's been 8 years now.
8 years?
Yes.
How did you find out? Okay,
for 4 years, I went to the hospital and then they told me that I have manic depression, because I was trying to commit suicide for several times because I didn't know what was going on with me, and I just tried to commit suicide. When I went to the psychiatric hospital, then I stayed there for a couple of months, and then that's how I got diagnosed. Okay. But it was long, after 4 years. After 4 years? Yeah, because it was quite long, because they told me it was depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, because I had a episode when I was growing up of abuse and whatever, so it was hard for them to diagnose
because I suppose, somebody listening as well who may not necessarily understand what depression feels like. What is depression? How does it work?
Depression feels like you are inside the tunnel, like a very dark tunnel, and you're trying to reach out for someone to help you, and it's hard. But now it's very nice, because now we've got SADAG. then they've got our back.
So that's the depressive episode of bipolar. But then you go through the manic episode as well.
We don't feel it that it's manic, because we actually feel it. It's a power, I don't know, it's like a power trip. You're able to do things that you never thought you're going to be able to. Like
what? What have you done when you are in that stage and then, realize later on that maybe I shouldn't have done that?
Okay, my mom. Okay, I hope my mom is listening, because she's the one who always gets to see my manic. Okay, maybe I'll just go look for my wallet. Then if I don't find it, I'll just automatically think that somebody stole it. Okay. And then I'll start breaking whatever that comes close to me.
Dr. Horn, do these stories, and we've had a lot of these stories coming through on the lines and here in the studio, do they all sound familiar to you?
They do sound familiar. I think one of the common themes is the reluctance of people to accept the diagnosis, even once they've been offered the diagnosis, and then the reluctance to take treatment, because when you're fine, you feel fine, and it's difficult to convince yourself, well, I've got to take these treatments, which might make me feel not 100% or may have some side effects. So maybe I should rather just leave them and go on with my life and think that I'm better. But unfortunately, bipolar disorder is a relapsing condition.
There's one that comes from William in Cape Town who says, should a bipolar sufferer disclose his condition to his employer? That's one, and very important there, Cassey. Another one comes from Paul, and I guess it goes back to some of the things that we said about being judged and so on, because Paul says, I find that people with so-called bipolar are very lazy. They don't want to work, and they can't keep jobs. That's according to Paul. We're going to get a response in as far as those issues are concerned then. I say that Buyisiwe is completely gobsmacked. You'll respond to that, Paul. Anonymous, though, says, how do medical aids handle bipolar disorder? And doctor, perhaps you can assist us in that regard. And there's also another question, which is quite important as well, Kobe Matiba, who says, but what causes bipolar in the first place? Is it something one is born with, or is it something that happens along the way? And we'll get responses to those very important questions in a little while. Is there a specific question that you'd like to respond to?
Yes, especially this one where they say bipolar people are lazy. Oh God, we're not lazy. When we get the energy, I tell you, we go on. Yes.
But also the doctor was talking about the reluctance perhaps to accept diagnosis at times. Largely, I assume, because you don't want to be judged. In your case, did you accept readily that this is the disorder that I have?
Oh my God, it took me actually 2 years to actually accept it, because now with the stigma that you get around the community, and then people actually start pointing at you with, oh God, did you know that she's crazy? It's very, very hard to accept it. It's very hard.
But you say, did you know she's crazy? Is that the often used, I suppose, characterization of your situation? Do people often say you're crazy? Yes,
and yes, all the time. And it used to make me really, really angry. There was a time that I started committing, attempting to commit suicide, because I was like, really, no, I don't want to live in this world. If people are going to be starting pointing at me, I used to cry a lot, and I used to just hide myself a lot, resign to jobs, go in, lock myself inside. But now, you know what, with time, you get used to it.
All right, I'm going to ask Cassey to respond as well. But let me take Dr. Wali in Pretoria on the line. Dr. Wali, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, thank you for your call.
Good morning to your guest. There tends to be too much emphasis on medication. Medication for a psychiatric problem, there is room for it. But it should be for an acute, relief of a serious psychiatric issue, like somebody who is depressed or whatever. But it should not be the mainstay of treatment, because everybody is bipolar to some extent. If you really look at it, Salani, your focus is what determines your emotions. If, as you're sitting down there, somebody tells you your car has been stolen, immediately your emotions will change from what it is now. But at the moment, you are not aware of that phenomenon happening, even though it could have happened 30 minutes ago. So basically, most of the time, you find psychiatrists prescribing drugs for problems that can be managed through behavioral therapy.
Because I think this is just a very interesting angle that you're raising here. But I'm going to get responses from everybody. Let me start, though, with Dr. Horn. Your response to what Dr. Wali is saying.
Yeah, I think Dr. Wali is making a lot of valid points. There are some people with bipolar disorder, some patients, who would disagree with him on some of those issues. He really made a very wide range of comments. And I think one of the things that he said that is interesting is that we're all a little bit bipolar. And that's quite true. All of us feel really happy sometimes, and all of us feel really sad sometimes. But that's not what bipolar is. Bipolar is being excessively happy for a long period of time, which is right out of proportion with what's going on, or excessively sad, which is not related to situations and circumstances. So it's abnormal happiness and abnormal sadness. He's quite right that medication is part of the picture, that lifestyle changes and psychological therapies or at least as important as that.
Cassey, you want to respond before I let Dr. Wali go?
Yes, he brought up some really interesting myths with regards to bipolar disorder. You know, bipolar disorder is a real medical illness. It changes the chemicals in your body. If you speak to any patient with bipolar, you would love it to be a light switch that you can change and say, today I don't want to be bipolar. Unfortunately, you can't because it's a medical illness. It's like telling a patient with diabetes, don't take your medication, think positively, you'll be okay. Some patients with severe bipolar need to take medication in conjunction with therapy, support, information. It's really important that people don't believe that you're just taking a quick fix. Medication is one part to the entire treatment for bipolar disorder.